And we're back with another episode focusing on the booze and bonds books. Well, by now you know the why, so let's dive right into the what on PCZ TV. Shall we? PCZ TV. Today's episode, Bonds, Booze, and Books. Episode 4. We finished last episode with Goldfinger. So we'll jump right back into it with For Your Eyes Only.
For your eyes only.
Now this isn't a traditional novel per se, it's a collection of short stories, so within that framework, we'll start with 1959's A View to a Kill.
With a view to a kill.
Bond's first appearance comes complete with an entire paragraph ruminating on what to drink in a French cafe. He rules out vodka. He rules out whiskey. He rules out gin. That's really it. He dismisses champagne. That's even rarer. He doesn't like Pernod due to its licorice taste, which is interesting since he inhaled ouzo and Rocky in From Russia with Love. But whatever. So he's sitting at Fouquet's pondering, and Fouquet, by the way, is a real place in Paris. And he finally settles on the Americano. Recall that this was the first drink that Bond drank in Fleming's book series, but here he calls it a poor drink. For such a poor drink, he does seem to have a few in the novels, but whatever. Bond stipulates the use of Perrier mineral water. Oh, that quintessential French product, which was actually started by an Englishman. Well, almost. Let's go back in time a little bit. I suppose popularized might be the better word, as the spring obviously existed for some time before the bottling, and the water was bottled on a small basis before the arrival of an Englishman. But in this time period, the main focus of Perrier was initially on the spa. St. John Harmsworth, who was a wealthy Englishman, bought the spa and spring, renamed the spring Source Perrier, started bottling the water in its distinctive green bottles, and expanded distribution and the popularity dramatically. Harmsworth marketed the product in Britain at a time when Frenchness was seen as chic and aspirational to the middle classes. Perrier was advertised as a champagne of mineral water, which if they tried that now would cause the EU fits, given today the regional protection of the name champagne. And that's the extent in that short story. Next up is For Your Eyes Only.
For your eyes only.
So Bond is drinking bourbon again. But he's buying it in Canada, so it is imported bourbon or a Canadian whiskey? I don't know. That's the extent of it for that one. These short stories are very short, because now we're off to Quantum of Solace, which finds Bond in Nassau. He's having dinner with the governor, and they consume brandy, type unknown, and then a whiskey soda, type unknown. And so far these short stories have been short on brand names or new drinks. So we turn now to RISICO. It's one of the few Fleming story titles that hasn't been used in any movie. I probably know why. Bond starts off by drinking a Negroni with Gordon's gin. The first appearance of the Negroni in a Fleming novel. It's said to have been invented in Florence by the Italian Count Camillo Negroni in the early 20th century. As legend has it, while he's at the bar Cassoni in Florence, Firenze, he demanded that the bartender strengthen his favorite cocktail, the Americano, by replacing the usual soda water with gin. So to further differentiate the drink, the bartender also employed an orange peel rather than the typical lemon peel, and the Negroni was born. The Count's fateful substitution resulted in one of the most popular stirred, not shaken, drinks in history. Apparently, one of the constants in this recipe is the vermouth. In this case, it's the use of Campari. So let's take a look at Campari. Campari was invented in 1860 by Gaspare Campari in Italy. It was originally colored with a carmine dye. These were derived from crushed cochineal insects. I don't know if I said that right. Which gave the drink its distinctive red color. Okay, insects? Crushed? To make dye? That sounds horrible. Fortunately, the Campari group discontinued the use of carmine in 2006. Oh, by the way, they also have some amazing brand ads. They were always on the cutting edge in this department. And this is the first time that Gordon Gin enters the picture. Gordon's is a London dry gin developed by, as you would guess, Alexander Gordon, who was a Londoner of Scots descent. He opened a distillery in the Southwark area in 1769, and the gin he developed proved so successful its recipe remains unchanged to this day. In 1904, the distinctive square-faced green bottle for the home market was introduced. It is allegedly popular with the Royal Navy, and as Bond is a commander in the Royal Navy, perhaps that's where he got his fondness for this gin. Or is it just by the fact that by the 1960s it was the best-selling gin in the world? I don't know. Later at dinner, Bond drinks some Chianti, and again he does so on the train, but no brand is provided. I think I've covered this before, but to be honest, some of this is a blur, maybe too much Chianti, but Chianti is an Italian red wine produced in the Chianti region of the Tuscany province. It's principally from one particular grape variety. It's historically associated with these cute little squat bottles enclosed with straw baskets. Every cliché image of an Italian restaurant seems to feature an empty bottle of this with a lit candle for a romantic dinner. Moving along on this booze cruise, Bond has a whiskey soda. Again, no brand provided. And then he enjoys a healthy breakfast of rum and coffee. Ah, the breakfast of champions. Okay, but wait. I think this is something new. Unless I'm very much mistaken, this is the first appearance of rum in a Bond novel. Now, this is pretty noteworthy because rum is so common down in the Bahamas and whatnot, and is a staple of the Royal Navy. You would think it would come up before now. So this is pretty amazing. Let's have a rum sidebar, shall we? Rum is a liquor made by fermenting and then distilling sugarcane molasses or sugarcane juice. Sugarcane was one of the key reasons that the Caribbean was colonized. It was to feed the sugar habit of Europe. So it's pretty natural, knowing human nature, that they would also make booze out of it. Now, rums are produced in various grades. Some are aged in oak casks, others spiced, others straight, whatever. Light rums are commonly used in cocktails, whereas the golden or dark rums are typically consumed straight or on the rocks or neat or used for cooking. But premium rums are made to be consumed either straight or iced. Now, as I mentioned earlier, it's rum that's associated with the Royal Navy, where it was mixed with water and beer to make grog. And all this dates back to like the 1600s. Now, not all rum is British Navy rum. Pussers, by the way, was, from my understanding, the rum for years in the Royal Navy was a blend of aged rum from at least two of the British colonies, of either Barbados, Guyana, Jamaica, Trinidad, etc. I guess they had to make sure that not one colony got the lion's share of the government business. And it was offered in a daily ration, pretty much to save off cannibalism in the Royal Navy.
And may I take this opportunity of emphasizing that there is no cannibalism in the British Navy.
And who else drinks rums? Arr, pirates! Yo ho ho and a bottle of rum. Well, in looking into it, it's interesting. It seems like the quote-unquote golden age of Caribbean piracy, which was the 1600s. I'm not sure why it was golden, but rum wasn't usually consumed. It was either brandy or wine. It was only in the later phases that they started to drink rum. But even though we don't know which rum Bond drank, it is still such an important spirit to chat about, and it is interesting it hasn't come up until this point. Now back to our regularly scheduled show. And we get to the next short story, which is the Hillbrand Rarity, another title not used in any film. Not a lot to speak about in this short story. Bond drinks beer, but it was provided by the American Milton Crest to his working team. And as he's on the boat, they end with a dinner which includes pink champagne, both of these types and brands unknown. And we first find Bond with a hangover, a bad one. He had spent the previous night gambling and drinking whiskey sodas. Brand name unknown, but he did drink 11 of them, so they must have been pretty good. And we're going to deviate just a little bit from the norm here, because while at Shrublands, Bond dreams of, but doesn't drink, a bottle of the cheapest Chianti. Funny what one wishes for when you can't have anything. For me, when I lived in Europe, I wished for Taco Bell, but that's weird. Now, he could have dreamt of the best wine, but instead he pines for vin ordinaire. No worries, though. It appears he got his wish. After leaving Shrublands, he enjoyed spaghetti bolognese and Chianti at Lucian's in Brighton. Well, let's move on, shall we? And after leaving Blighty, Bond goes back to the Bahamas. Once there, he enjoys a midday drink with Domino. And he describes the options to her as hard and soft. And by soft, he doesn't mean a soft drink like they say in America. It's just a drink with less booze. She orders a Bloody Mary, and Bond orders a vodka tonic with a dash of bitter. Now, we don't know the vodka type, but I'm telling you, it better be Polish. See video 2 in this series as to why. Sorry.
I think you got the point.
But it's actually a great time to chat about bitters. The origin of bitters goes back to the ancient Egyptians, who may have infused medicinal herbs in jars of wine, or maybe not, who knows. This practice was further developed in the Middle Ages, and many of the brands and styles of bitters today reflect that whole approach to herbal stomach preparations. It's back to the Renaissance, where everyone thought this was a medicinal product. To make matters even more confusing, there are digestive and cocktail bitters, with the former meant to be drunk alone, and the latter designed as a flavoring agent. Well, given that Bond wants a dash of bitters in this vodka tonic, I'm guessing that the bartender will probably use Angostura bitters. Why? Because it's the most popular bitter in the world and has a fascinating history. The Angostura recipe was developed as a tonic by Johann Gottlieb Benjamin Siegelt, and I hope I said that right, who was a German Surgeon General in Bolivar's army in Venezuela, which is sort of weird, but there you go. Siegert began to sell his Angostura in 1824, and since he was based in the town of, you guessed it, Angostura, he named it after the town. Although in 1875, manufacturing moved to Trinidad, which is just off the coast of Venezuela, where it remains to this day. Angostura won a medal at the 1873 Vienna World's Fair, and the medal is still depicted on the oversized label, along with the reverse side, which shows Emperor Franz Joseph I of Austria. One cool feature that it is famous for is its label being bigger than the bottle. This was apparently the result of two different individuals who were responsible for initially making the label and the bottle, and the lack of communication between the two of them. So it's nice to see that some things never change. Missed that meeting, missed that email. So we move on to Bond hanging out with one of his old friends, Felix. And when he's with Felix, they order double dry martinis for lunch. Not just dry, mind you, but double dry.
A martini, shaken, not stirred.
At this point, there's no indication in the order if it's gin or vodka, but I'm going to guess. I'm going to guess gin. Why? Because later, in the Pineapple Room bar, Felix lectures the bartender on bar economics, and he uses the purchase of a bottle of Gordon's gin as the example. If you've ever missed your Econ 101 class in college, you're welcome to read the passage. Fortunately, Professor Felix finishes, and the next drink is bourbon. And we've come to discover that Bond loves this stuff. He first has an old-fashioned, and then, when Bond in his hotel room later, he orders a meal and, of course, a double on the rocks. Have you noticed a trend here? Fleming is dropping brand names less frequently than before. So Bond is drinking a bourbon, who knows what kind, and the final libation, again, type unknown, is champagne. But at least he orders for 3. One of which being his own Spectre. Is that why he drinks so much? I don't know, but he does it after beating Largo in gambling. Next on the agenda is The Spy Who Loved Me from 1962, which is a weird novel in the Fleming catalog. As you know, it's written from the first person of the damsel in distress. Bond doesn't drink in it, so we'll just chalk this one up to an unusual novel and move on. 1963's On Her Majesty's Secret Service brings us right back to Bond drinking heavily. Yay! Now, if he took a booze holiday in The Spy Who Loved Me, don't worry, he makes up for it in Her Majesty's Secret Service. So put on your seatbelt, as we have a lot of ground to cover. Bond checks into the Royale Hotel and orders his usual, which is a bottle of the Tanger Blanc en Blanc. Now, please see episode 1, where we talk about Tanger in that case. Oh, I forgot, but before making it to the hotel, he had driven around France, and at one point consumed, Polier Fusset. Which again, I apologize to the French everywhere. It is an unpronounceable French wine. But this time, it's not from Fleming's preferred area of France. It's a white wine, more specifically a Chardonnay, from the Massonnet subregion of Burgundy, which is in central France. Back to the Royale. Bond drinks some more after dinner, and it's an old friend, Mouton Rouchard. This time it's in 1953. Now, Bond drank a 1947 vintage in Goldfinger, and M enjoyed a 1934 vintage in Moonraker. Did I say that right? For more about this winery, go back and see episode 2. Sorry. And a new liquor enters the scene. Calvados. Calvados is a brandy from the Normandy area of France, usually made with apples, although sometimes apparently with pears. I'm familiar with it only with apples. The apple orchards and brewers in this area are famous and date back as far as the 8th century. The first known record of distillation was in the Norman era. It was made by the squire Guy de Gouberville in 1553. Wow. The Guild for Cider Distillation was created about 50 years later in 1606. Now, fun fact, during World War I, cider brandy was requisitioned by the government to make explosives for the armament industry due to its alcohol content. That's a pretty strange thing to think about. You're firing cannonballs at Germans with Calvados. But anyway, the appellation contrôlée, whatever, regulations gave Calvados a protected name in 1942 because everyone seems to have a protected name. Bond and Tracy enjoy a bottle of crude champagne. Now, this is a new brand for Bond. Krug is a champagne house founded by Joseph Krug in 1843. Of course, it's based in the Champagne region. Now, he was born Johann Joseph Krug in Mainz on the Rhine at a time when the city was part of the Napoleonic Empire. He dispensed with his name Johann, left the area in 1824, and moved to Paris. Well, Germans at that time were very much in demand as accountants, and as such he joined a champagne house and learned the business. Joseph opened his own champagne house, and it was established as a grand mark. By the 1880s, the prestige of Krug was acknowledged globally. In 1866, the house moved to its premises in Rue Colbert, in Rion, that it still occupies. Now, Krug offers various champagnes, both blends and vintage. We don't know which one Bond drank, but in any case, this is a classic brand. And ladies and gentlemen, a new bourbon has entered the scene. Bond drinks an I.W. Harper bourbon with water. Well, the state of Kentucky will tell you that 95% of the world's bourbon is made in Kentucky. Is that true? I don't know, but that's what the state said. I.W. Harper is a Kentucky bourbon. And its history? Well, Isaac Burnham immigrated to the United States in 1867. He started work in New York, but his employer went out of business, and as a result, he became a traveling salesman. Eventually, he moved to Kentucky, and he became a bookkeeper for a liquor wholesaler. And he saw where the money was, so he saved enough money to bring his brother Bernard over to the U.S. And in 1872, Isaac and his brother established their own company, Bernheim Brothers, purchased a distillery in Kentucky, and began to produce I.W. Harper bourbon. I.W. stood for Isaac Wolf, the given name of the older Burnham, and the brothers choose the new name of Harper over their surname because it sounded more American. Now, fun fact, the Bernheim distillery was just one of 10 distilleries granted permission to operate during Prohibition for medicinal purposes. Unfortunately, times did not go well, and eventually the I.W. Harper bourbon, the IP was purchased by Diageo, and it was relaunched as a product being distilled at a different distillery. As we continue through the novel, Bond drinks more bourbon, brands unknown, but again, at another Bond mill, it appears mainly liquid in nature, he does name drop Harper's again, but this time it's on the rocks. And the final bourbon is Jack Daniels. Now, Jack Daniels is a brand of Tennessee whiskey. I wonder if the guys in Tennessee and Kentucky ever talk about their competing bourbon claims, but in any case, JD is world famous. It's produced in Lynchburg, Tennessee, and it's packaged in an equally famous square bottle. The Jack Daniels brand official website suggests that its founder, Jasper Newton Jack Daniels, was born in 1850. He was the youngest of 10 children born to his mother, God bless her, and his father, Calloway Daniel, who was an immigrant from Wales. Well, life happens. Jack's dad remarried. Jack didn't get along with his stepmother, and after Calloway died in the Civil War, Jack just ran away from home. He was taken in by Dan Call, who was a local preacher and moonshine distiller, because back then, why not? Anyway, Jack learned the distilling trade from Call and his master distiller, Nathan Nearest Green. Green was known to specialize in what was called the Lincoln County process, which is a distilling process that filters the whiskey through sugar maple charcoal. More about this in a second. In 1875, after receiving inheritance, he founded a legal registered distilling business with Call. And Jack Daniels took over complete ownership shortly thereafter. He began using his square-shaped bottles in 1897. Jack Daniels had a surge in popularity after the whiskey received the gold medal for the finest whiskey at the 1904 St. Louis Fair. Irony, Moore County, where the Jack Daniels distillery is located, is still one of the state's many dry counties. Now, okay, I joked about it earlier, about Kentucky and Tennessee, but all Tennessee whiskey is from Tennessee, but not all whiskey is Tennessee whiskey. What? What am I talking? Okay, let's get this straight. Tennessee whiskey is a straight whiskey produced in the U.S. state of Tennessee, although it's legally defined as a bourbon whiskey in some international trade agreements. Most producers of Tennessee whiskey disclaim the difference to their products as bourbon and don't use them on their bottle or advertising. Sour mash is common. All current Tennessee whiskey producers are required by Tennessee law to produce their whiskeys in Tennessee and to use a filtering agent known as the Lincoln County process, which is what I referenced earlier. Now, besides the perceived marketing value of the distinction, Tennessee whiskey and bourbon have almost identical requirements, with most Tennessee whiskeys meeting the criteria for bourbon. Nearly all Tennessee whiskeys undergo that Lincoln County process, where they filter it through a thick layer of charcoal before they put into a new charred oak barrel for aging. Alright, so that's the difference, and it's not extensive, but there you go. That's fascinating. Now on to the next booze in this cruise, vodka. Well, in a taxi on the way to his flat, Bond plans his next meal, which of course is heavy on vodka, but this time it's 4 double vodka tonics with Angostura. Wow, that's a hell of a meal there, James. Later in the novel, in the guise of Sir Hilary, he orders the classic, the vodka martini, double dry, of course. And again, he orders another double vodka martini. Then we move on to brandy. Bond orders some brandy with ginger ale. Now, Fleming doesn't specify what type of ginger ale. Ginger ale was initially created by an Irishman in Belfast, Joseph Cantrell, in the 1850s. It's a carbonated soft drink made with ginger. Yay. But dry ginger ale was created by the Canadian John McLaughlin. And as a surprise, they patented it in 1907 as Canada Dry Ginger Ale. And I'm not exactly sure what the difference is, but there you go. Going back to brandy, Bond asks for brandy and coffee. And the last time he had that was in Moonraker. And finally, the Red Cross man gives Bond a swig of brandy straight from his flask. This book is getting pretty heavy into varieties of booze, isn't it? But don't worry, it will continue, because Bond then asks for a flask of schnapps. When in Gloria, do as the Glorians do. Well, Bond drinks a schnapps with no brand mentioned, and we spoke about schnapps in our last episode, but you go back and watch it, so I won't go into detail here. And apparently, in no order, is wine. In this case, it's a Marsala. Now you gotta love this passage because M sounds like quite the character. He seems a little out of character, but Marsala is a fortified wine, either dry or sweet, produced in the region surrounding the Italian city of Marsala. Of course. And surprise, the European grants protected designation to Marsala wine. It's a fortified wine. It was probably first popularized outside Sicily by the Liverpool merchant of John Woodhouse, because he landed in the port of Marsala, discovered the local wine, which was aged in wood casks and tastes similar to the Spanish and Portuguese fortified wines which were populated in England. So, idea, he decides to start importing it into England, which became very popular. Over time, Vincenzo Florio purchased the Woodhouse firm, among many others, in the late 19th century and consolidated much of the Marsala wine industry. So that's the wine. As for the other wine, it's only mentioned as a cheap Algerian wine. So who knows what it might be, but Algeria has a surprisingly long history of winemaking. Its viticultural history dates back to the settlement by Phoenicians, and continued under the Roman Empire. So Man, that's some serious history. Now, prior to the Algerian War of Independence, Algeria was the largest wine exporter in the world, accounting for nearly 2/3 of the total international wine trade. That is mind-blowing. Here's the other interesting bit. Most of the Algerian wine production takes place in just a few regions of Mascara, Mostanin, I said that wrong, and Tiret, which are located in the northwest part of the country. But even though it's limited to this area, it has as much land under the vineyards as the countries of Germany and South Africa. Now, everything started changing a little bit after Algerian independence in 1962. The wine industry was hit hard by the loss of the French settlers and the French army who were in Algeria, who apparently drank a lot. And it also provided a sizable domestic market for the wine when it was exported to France. The other aspect is the new Algerian government thought it was a little inappropriate for an Islamic country to be so economically dependent on alcohol. And thus we see the rise and the fall of the Algerian wine market, and why Bond ended up with a bottle of bad Algerian wine. And finally, something rare for Bond, beer. And something common for this video series, my bad pronunciation. Anyway, while engagement ring hunting for Tracy, he and his taxi driver, an old Luftwaffe pilot, stop off at a beer cellar for a few liters. Well, the Franzikaner Keller. So let's first talk about the establishment. Bond is in Munich, München, so it makes total sense that he drinks German beer in a beer house or a beer garden, because Munich's famous for them after all. And Franzikaner actually is German for Franciscan, which is a lot easier for me to pronounce. And Catholic monasteries have long been the bastions of alcohol production. Beer served the monasteries in many ways. The production of beer rendered often questionable water into something drinkable. The grains and other ingredients were also formed a nutritious piece of everyday diet for the monks, who consumed it all. And they sold it to lay people to raise funds for the church. I guess you can say this is their holy water. Dun-dun-dun. Now, there are, of course, a whole bunch of different monks out there. Let's talk about the Order of Friars Minor, the Franciscans, or Franzikaner. The Franciscans trace their origins to the founder, St. Francis of Assisi, in 1209. Originally, the order was required to beg for food as the monks preached on the street, but over time, they opened up monasteries and convents and started brewing beers. Now, the Franciscan monks in Bavaria also made beer for their daily consumption, but they also produced a special beer for extended fasts during Lent and Advent, when no solid food was permitted. This beer was intended to revise the extra nourishment, and so was made with an extra portion of malt. They also brewed a strong beer with the local German influences that we now know as Doppelbock. Now, the original ecclesiastical brew, inspired by this Bavarian tradition, was given the name Salvatore, and it was made to the public in 1780. So other breweries followed suit, and also started carrying the suffix "ator" on their names. So many Doppelbocks have a name ending in "ator" as a tribute. So now we know a whole bunch about the brewing monks. So let's pop back and zero in on this brewery. Oh my gosh, okay. In 1397, the ancestor of the brewery was mentioned for the first time in Munich. The ownership changed often here and there and everywhere until 1854, when it moved to its current location, which it still uses to this day. In 1867, it became the largest brewery in town. And in 1872, the Franzikaner Leiste Brewery served beer at the Oktoberfest for the first time, called Spaten, the famous Spaten beer. So, okay, it's hard to track back all the details, but it seems like and work with me. By 1872, this was not a Franciscan monastery anymore. It was just a independent brewery that's been bought and sold a few times. And they just sort of used the name or continued the name. I'm guessing it's all marketing, even back then. But, veering back to Bond, there is no known Franziskaner Keller that I'm aware of in this time period. There is a Zoom Franziskaner, which is a restaurant beer hall whose name literally means to the Franziskaner. And ironically, the oldest Zoom Franziskaner is in Sweden and dates from 1898. The one in Munich opened in 1966, which is a full 3 years after On Her Majesty's Secret Service. According to TripAdvisor, it's a bit of a tourist trap, so if you're in Munich and trying to do a Bond tour, I guess no real need to stop here, but it's always good to stop at a beer hall, right? Well, it's also interesting that of all the famous beer gardens in Munich, and it has a lot, Fleming chooses an imaginary one. Now, did I get that right? Feel free to comment in the boxes below. I didn't say that right, but you know what I mean. Okay, let's talk about the beer itself, since Bond drinks 4 steins of it. Oh, by the way, when I was in Munich, I discovered that these steins are 1 liter each. That's a whole bunch of beer, folks. And back to Bond. The Franziskaner name was created in 1935, and not by monks, not by Franciscan friars, but its label shows a Franziskaner monk. So once again, marketing. In 1964, the brewery produced its first wheat beer, and 10 years later, all of the Franziskaner labeled brews became wheat beers. So don't expect to find the beer that Bond drank in your local market. Well, what can I say? But since it's Germany, I will tell you that this beer is produced according to the Edict of Purity of 1516 because it's required by law. This means they can only use water, barley, malt, hops, and yeast. And I'm having a hard time talking today. And just for that, I'm not going to go into detail about the Edict of Purity, but it is interesting if you want to read more about it. And now the final booze before Bond's liver revolts is he has a Steinhager. Okay, wait, that's an umlaut, which means, how is it pronounced again? Oh, I don't even know. Oh, feel free to put a comment below on what I'm supposed to say. I don't know. So, the way Fleming describes it, he describes it as a schnapps, but it's technically not a schnapps. It's a German gin. Now, the name derives from the village of Steinhager, where during the 19th century, about 20 of these distilleries were producing the juniper oil required for the gin. Today, it's limited down to just 2 manufacturers, H.W. Schlick, I said that wrong, and Zum Fürsthoff. Oh my gosh. And of course, guess what? Since 1989, Steinhager has a geographic indication that's protected by the European Union. Like everything. Okay, folks, I gotta stop here. There is a lot of complicated words we just went through. And we've still got You Only Live Twice, Man with a Golden Gun, Octopussy, and The Living Daylights left. Who knows what Bond will be drinking in these books? So stay tuned for the final episode of Bonds in Books whenever my liver dries out. If you've been watching this far, I thank you. Bye!